Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
Glad to be here.
So we're diving into something today that I think completely shifts how we view success. Uh, Mastering your money isn't actually about math. It's not about running the perfect equation or like building some impenetrable spreadsheet.
Right. Not at all.
It is entirely about psychology. It's about overcoming these hidden mental traps that just quietly sabotage us. Because the craziest thing is, true wealth is actually the money you don't see.
Yeah, that's the core of it, really. We spend, decades optimizing our portfolios, our tax strategies, and our careers, but we completely neglect the one thing driving it all.
Our minds.
Exactly, our minds. And the sources we're unpacking today, they radically reorient how we view risk and greed. They diagnose the actual mechanics of financial self-sabotage.
Which is huge. And before we jump into those mechanics, just a quick note for you listening. If you like my channel, please subscribe and hit the like button.
Yes, please do.
Okay, so our mission today is to equip you with the mental frameworks you need to escape these invisible traps. We are going to break down the barrier between, theoretical finance and real-world human behavior.
And that starts with dismantling probably the most dangerous assumption in modern finance.
Oh, the illusion of logic.
Yeah, the illusion that humans are purely logical creatures who can just execute a flawless, rational spreadsheet plan over like a 40-year period.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because conventional wisdom treats finance like physics,
Yeah.
right? Like the math is totally objective.
Right, like 2 + 2 is 4.
Exactly. You look at historical data, you calculate your compound interest, and you just make the optimal choice. But the sources point out something that completely shatters that idea.
They really do.
They say two sane, highly intelligent people can look at the exact same investment data, and one will aggressively buy while the other desperately sells.
Because they're viewing that data through entirely different lenses. Lenses forged by their unique lived experiences. I mean, think about it. Your personal firsthand experience with money makes up maybe, a microscopic sliver of global economic history?
Like 0.001%.
Exactly. But that tiny sliver dictates almost 100% of how you view the world. Your brain basically wires itself based on what it's survived.
Yeah, like take a stockbroker who came of age during the Great Depression.
Oh, wow.
The emotional scar tissue from watching banks collapse and families lose their homes, it's immense. Their nervous system is forever wired to view the stock market as this, predator.
Right, and you could show them the most robust, historically sound spreadsheet proving that equities always recover over time.
And it wouldn't matter at all. The biological fear just completely overrides the math.
Contrast that wiring with, say, a tech worker who entered the workforce during the euphoric 1990s dot-com boom.
Oh man, they were getting dopamine hits every single day.
Exactly. Every time they took a wild risk on some unproven internet startup, they got rewarded. So to them, massive risk feels completely synonymous with massive reward.
Or consider an investor who graduated right into the teeth of the 2008 financial crisis versus someone whose first real experience with money was the 2017 crypto run.
Completely different universes.
The 2008 investor views a market dip as the beginning of the apocalypse. But the 2017 investor views that exact same dip as a temporary glitch before the next rocket ship to the moon.
Yeah, they're not looking at the same market. They're looking at their own memories.
It honestly reminds me of practicing a battle strategy. You've got this beautifully drawn map. The troop movements are perfectly logical. Everything makes sense on paper. That's your pristine financial spreadsheet.
Right.
But then you get out on the field, the chaos starts, and you immediately get punched in the face.
Yeah, Mike Tyson style. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah, exactly. The alarms are deafening, cortisol spikes, and your prefrontal cortex. The logical part of your brain just completely shuts down. You revert entirely to pure survival instinct. So when the market drops 30% and your life savings is vaporizing, the spreadsheet strategy just burns up.
And that physiological response is the invisible variable missing from every textbook. People don't lose money because they're stupid or because they lack data.
Right.
They lose money because the world is incredibly loud, and in a crisis, our amygdala screams much louder than our logic. I mean, spreadsheets don't feel stress, if they don't have mortgages to pay.
Or kids to put through college.
Yeah.
So the standard advice to just act like an emotionless, rational robot is actually terrible advice.
It's a recipe for disaster. The source material makes a vital distinction here. Aiming to be mostly reasonable is vastly superior to trying to be coldly rational.
Mostly reasonable. I like that.
Because coldly rational relies on maximum efficiency, which is brittle. The moment conditions aren't perfect, the rational plan snaps. But being reasonable, that factors in your humanity. It builds in room for doubt, for making mistakes, and most importantly, for actually sleeping at night.
Because reasonable is sustainable.
Yes. And sustainability is literally the only thing that allows compounding to work its magic over decades.
Which is a perfect pivot, because if pure cold logic isn't the secret to extreme success, we naturally look around for what is. We study the billionaires, the tycoons, assuming their extreme wealth is just the pure result of their own brilliant decisions.
We desperately want to believe in a pure meritocracy, right? The human brain craves control, so we construct these neat narratives where success is fully earned and failure is just fully deserved.
But doing that means we completely ignore the invisible twin forces shaping every life: luck and risk.
Oh, the Bill Gates and Ken Evans story from The Sources perfectly illustrates this.
Yeah, walk us through that, because it's wild. Everyone knows Bill Gates is brilliant and hardworking.
Right, but in the early 1970s, he happened to attend Lakeside School in Seattle, which was one of the only high schools in the entire world that had a computer terminal.
In the world.
Yeah. It was a 1 in a million stroke of absolute blind luck. He got years of hands-on programming experience before most university professors even knew what a keyboard was.
But then there's his close friend, Kent Evans.
Exactly. By all accounts, Kent was equally brilliant, equally obsessed with computers, and he shared that exact same rare advantage at Lakeside.
But Kent experienced a 1 in a million stroke of devastating risk.
He died in a mountaineering accident before graduating high school. It's tragic, but we're completely blind to the thousands of parallel universes where the outcomes were reversed or where neither of them achieved success.
Wait, so are we saying hard work doesn't matter and we shouldn't try to learn from successful people at all?
What's fascinating here is that acknowledging luck doesn't diminish hard work at all. It just changes how we study success.
Okay, how so?
Well, hard work is just the mandatory baseline to even get on the playing field. The danger is in idolizing and blindly copying extreme individuals. The more extreme someone's financial success is, the more likely their outcome was propelled by an unrepeatable lightning strike of luck.
Or by taking massive risks that would have bankrupted 99% of normal people.
Exactly. You literally cannot replicate Elon Musk's specific timing or Warren Buffett's specific era.
Ah, so trying to copy an individual billionaire is basically like trying to replicate a winning lottery ticket by, buying the same sequence of numbers the day after the drawing.
That's exactly the mechanism at play. Instead of copying individuals, you have to study broad patterns.
Because patterns smooth out the extremes of luck and risk.
Right. Living below your means, diversifying investments, avoiding high-interest debt, those mechanics keep working across different decades and economies. They build a financial life resilient enough to survive the bad luck, so you're still in the game when good luck finally hits.
But here's where it gets really interesting. If broad patterns are so reliable, why do we constantly ignore them to gamble on the next big thing?
Because we love a good story.
We do. We don't just crave control. We are hardwired for narratives, even when those narratives totally trick us into playing games we fundamentally don't understand.
The sources call them appealing fictions. When reality is too complex or just too boring, our brains naturally gravitate toward narratives that offer an easy out. We bypass critical thinking entirely because believing the story feels chemically rewarding.
Like the lottery trap.
Yeah.
The math says the probability of winning the Powerball is, what, 1 in nearly 300 million?
Something absurd like that, yeah.
Your logical brain knows handing over 20 bucks for a ticket is a terrible investment, but then you hear on the news about a baker 2 towns over who just won $200 million.
And the narrative is so seductive.
You don't picture the millions of losing tickets rotting in trash cans. You vividly imagine quitting your job and buying a yacht.
We watched the exact same neurological hijacking happen during the 2021 crypto boom.
Oh, absolutely.
Thousands of tokens were launched. The vast majority had no utility, no cash flow, no structural roadmap, but they came wrapped in these incredible narratives spun by influencers.
People weren't analyzing blockchain math. They were buying the dream that this time it's different and that they'd found a shortcut.
And by 2022, billions of dollars quietly vanished when reality caught up. The most dangerous financial threats aren't complex frauds. They're comforting half-truths we desperately want to believe.
Which brings up this weird evolutionary quirk about optimism versus pessimism.
Oh, this is so true.
If an analyst goes on TV and predicts the market will crash 40% tomorrow, it's front page news everywhere.
Because the human amygdala treats negative news as a life or death survival threat. Pessimism commands our attention. It sounds urgent and realistic, and just profoundly wise.
But if that same analyst predicts the market will slowly gain 140% over the next 6 years due to steady corporate earnings.
People literally change the channel.
Yeah. It sounds naive, or like a sleazy sales pitch.
Because positive news isn't a survival threat, it's a nice to have. But historically, quiet, steady optimism is the far more accurate lens. Setbacks and crashes happen fast and loud.
But progress and compound interest happen slowly and quietly in the background. And that bias toward the loud and urgent is why we get sucked into copying the wrong people. We get caught up in the panic and forget we're all playing completely different games.
The disconnect between a short-term day trader and a long-term retirement investor is massive.
Huge. If you're investing for a retirement 30 years away, your goal is long-term compounding. But you log on to social media, you see a day trader screaming about a 5% drop in a tech stock.
And your amygdala reacts to their panic. But if you sell your positions based on their noise, you're inheriting their risks without understanding their rules. They are playing a game of minute-by-minute momentum, and you are playing a game of decades.
And we see the exact same disconnect with spending habits, right? Like a young lawyer at a cutthroat firm might buy an outrageously expensive Porsche. For them, in that environment, projecting high-income success might actually be a strategic tool to win wealthy clients.
Right, it's basically a business expense disguised as a car.
But if a freelance graphic designer working from their living room sees that lawyer on Instagram and feels inadequate, they might go finance a luxury car just to project status.
And they're playing a game of creative autonomy, yet adopting the expensive rules of a corporate law game. It serves absolutely no strategic purpose for them. You have to constantly define your own time horizon and ruthlessly filter out any advice or social pressure that belongs to a different game.
But it's so confusing because of the biological drive. We know conceptually that financing a luxury lifestyle to impress strangers is a trap. But if nobody is actually impressed by the fancy stuff, why is the urge to show off so universally hardwired into us?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it comes down to a phenomenon the sources call the man-in-the-car paradox.
I love this concept.
It perfectly captures the illusion of status. Imagine you're walking down the street, and a sleek, custom-built $500,000 Ferrari rolls past you. Pay close attention to your internal monologue right then.
I can tell you exactly what I'm not thinking. I'm not thinking, wow, the person driving that car must be so smart and hardworking. I respect them deeply.
No, you're completely ignoring the driver.
Totally. I'm thinking, man, I wish I had that car. People would think I was so cool if I were driving it.
And that is the paradox. We buy luxury goods hoping to be admired, but those other people aren't admiring us. They're using our display of wealth as a mirror to reflect their own desires. They are picturing themselves in the driver's seat.
So we're essentially going broke trying to impress people who are entirely ignoring us. We fundamentally confuse looking rich with being rich.
And they are structural opposites. Looking rich is loud. It's the exotic vacation posted online, the oversized watch, the massive loan hiding out of frame.
But being rich is silent.
Completely silent. True wealth consists of the financial assets that have not been converted into physical stuff. It's the unspent money sitting in investment accounts.
But why is it so hard to grasp the concept of enough? We constantly move the goalposts on ourselves.
Because humans are deeply social, hierarchical creatures. In ancient tribes, higher status meant better access to food and safety. It meant survival. So your brain measures well-being not by absolute wealth, but by relative wealth, how you compare to the people right around you.
The dopamine hit comes from just being slightly ahead of the pack.
Exactly. But in the modern financial world, this instinct goes catastrophically haywire.
Which brings us to Sam Bankman-Fried, the ultimate modern cautionary tale of the moving goalpost.
Oh, absolutely.
By 2021, the guy was worth over $20 billion. He had more money than his descendants could spend in 100 lifetimes. He was on magazine covers.
Yet $20 billion wasn't enough, because his peer group had shifted to centibillionaires and heads of state. He had no stopping mechanism. He risked everything, mixing customer funds, destroying his reputation not to put food on the table, but to chase more status and perceived power.
He traded something he undeniably had and needed for something he absolutely didn't have and didn't need. There's this piercing quote from philosopher Bertrand Russell in the sources. It is impossible to escape envy by means of success.
The bar just keeps moving. You buy a nice house, you get invited to a dinner party by someone with a bigger house, and the dopamine resets.
The true admiration we're actually craving when we buy that Ferrari doesn't come from luxury items. It comes from demonstrating humility, empathy, and integrity. True wealth requires prioritizing long-term peace of mind over short-term social praise.
Beautifully said.
So, what does this all mean? If the ultimate goal of accumulating money isn't to buy a garage full of cars or win a status game, what is the actual utility of wealth?
The climax of the source material reveals that the ultimate currency isn't the dollar. It's time, survival, and absolute autonomy.
And getting rich is one specific skill set, right?
Mhm.
It requires boldness and taking highly calculated risks, but staying rich.
Requires almost the exact opposite psychological profile. It requires deep paranoia, extreme caution, and an immense amount of patience to let mathematics work over time.
The statistic about Warren Buffett in the sources completely rewired my understanding of patience.
It's staggering.
He's worth around $160 billion today, but over $156 billion of that wealth came after his 65th birthday.
That is the quiet, relentless power of compounding. Buffett didn't get rich by constantly day trading hot tech trends. He got rich by surviving. He stayed in the game for 8 decades. His success is largely driven by the mechanics of tail events.
Explain tail events for us, because that concept breaks how we're normally taught to think about success.
Well, we're taught to think in normal distributions, where average efforts yield average results. But in finance, power laws rule. A tail event is the extreme rare outcome at the very end of a distribution curve. Out of the hundreds of companies Buffett invested in, the vast majority were average or outright failures.
Really?
Yeah. Almost all of his staggering wealth came from just a tiny handful of massive tail events, like buying a huge stake in Coca-Cola in 1989 and simply refusing to sell it for 30 years. 1% of the actions drove 99% of the results.
But refusing to sell is psychologically brutal. The market is endlessly volatile. You see a stock drop 20%, the amygdala fires up the panic response.
This is where the sources reframe volatility so brilliantly. You have to view market drops as a fee, not a fine.
I love that linguistic shift.
It completely changes the neurological response. When you get a fine, like a speeding ticket, you did something wrong, you feel guilty, and your goal is to never do it again. But a fee is just the price of admission.
Like buying a ticket to a theme park.
Exactly. If you want to ride the roller coaster of massive long-term stock market gains, the fee you have to pay is emotional discomfort and volatility.
The Netflix example they use is wild. The stock returned over 35,000% between 2002 and 2018.
Incredible returns.
If you held it, you made an absolute fortune. But during that massive 16-year run, the stock spent 94% of the time trading below its all-time high. It was constantly dropping, recovering, dropping again.
And if you view those drops as a fine telling you that you made a mistake, you panic and sell. But if you view them as the necessary fee for that 35,000% return, you stay securely in your seat.
And to stay in your seat, you need a margin of safety. This is the whole mechanical function of saving money. Most people think you only save for a specific purchase, like a house or a car.
Right, but saving without a specific goal creates an emotional shock absorber. You're saving to create a tangible gap between your ego and your income. Cash isn't just a drag on your portfolio, it's an emotional option. It prevents you from ever being forced to sell your assets during a panic just to pay your bills.
It's a defensive shield. You have to be deeply paranoid about your short-term survival while remaining wildly optimistic about the long-term trajectory of the economy.
I call that operating with a barbell personality. On one end of the psychological barbell, you are deeply cautious, holding cash, preparing for disasters. On the other end, you're incredibly optimistic that over decades, human innovation will drive the market upward. Holding both mindsets simultaneously secures the prize.
Which perfectly aligns with that fascinating 1981 study by Angus Campbell. He sought to find the common denominator of human happiness.
And what did he find?
He found that the absolute strongest predictor of well-being wasn't a person's income level or the size of their house or their job title. It was simply the feeling of having control over their own time.
That autonomy is the highest dividend that money pays. The ability to wake up every single morning and definitively say, I can do whatever I want today with whoever I want for as long as I want.
That freedom is what you are actually buying when you actively choose not to upgrade your car or inflate your lifestyle. You are literally buying your own life back from the obligations of debt.
It's profound.
It really is. Okay, let's bring this all together for everyone listening. The overarching lesson here is that raw intelligence isn't going to save you from your own evolutionary biases. You cannot outsmart panic with a spreadsheet. Real wealth isn't the loud, flashy assets on social media. It's the silent assets compounding quietly in the background. It takes immense emotional regulation and patience. And the ultimate finish line isn't an arbitrary dollar amount. It is the freedom to own your time.
Which raises an important question to leave you with. What if the ultimate milestone of financial success isn't hitting a specific net worth, but simply reaching a state of mind where you no longer care what anybody else thinks of your financial life?
Wow. A state where the mirror of other people's expectations completely shatters and you're finally just playing your own game. I love that. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, that pristine, logical spreadsheet is a beautiful tool until you get blinded by the smoke of a real-world panic. So build your margin of safety, define your own game, and above all else, protect your peace of mind. Catch you next time.